In this lesson, we're making some updates to the web application where we're going to be selecting the content from the Google spreadsheet and returning it back as an object within the endpoint, within the web app URL. And we're also going to be adding in the ability to select by category, so that way we can isolate and select out the different items that are within the spreadsheet. And this is going to be all according to the category. So that's what's going to get returned back. So we're going to be providing a way to sort and filter content that's coming from the spreadsheet and then return that data back according to whatever category the user has selected. So in this case, we're going to update the spreadsheet or the web app as well to return back for the category. And I've just duplicated some of these items here within the spreadsheet so that we got more items being returned back. So we can select any one of the categories. It should be animal. If I refresh, then I'm only getting the animal jokes. And if category is blank, if it gets returned back as null, we're going to get returned back all of the items within the web API. So if there's no category specified, then it just returns everything back into the endpoint. So even though that we were able to connect using fetch, we can also set the meme type to the output. So fetch is able to determine that this is a JSON formatted data and use it as an object. But in order to set the right meme type, you have an option within Google Apps Script where you can set meme type. And then using the content service, this allows you to set the different meme types. I'll move the code down a bit so it's easier to read. And then as soon as you press the dot, it's going to give you the meme type and then the dot again, and you can select the different meme type. So this will actually force the output to be with whatever that meme type is. And when you refresh it, so just want to make sure that I'm on the test deployment. And that's where we're going to see the changes take place. So it actually looks the same, and it's actually outputting very similar output, but this is just forcing the meme type. So if you do need to have the strict connection JSON meme type, then you can do it this way. So also whenever we're retrieving the data, we notice that we're retrieving that first row of content. So we don't want to necessarily return back the first row when we're getting the content, when we're constructing the content. And we want to use that first row and get a headings array of that first row. So this is going to be the headings of the content in the first row, so contained within the rows array, and we're just returning back that first object. And in order to use it within an object format, the option is to turn them all to lowercase, and that means that we need to convert it to a string first, and we can use the map method in order to return back the heading items and iterate through each one of them. So let's go through the log, and we'll list out the heading, and we'll run the do-get in the debugger. So we see we get all of these being listed. So we want to change them all to lowercase, and there is a way to do that. Just as with JavaScript, Google Apps Script has the same format. So we need to transform that temp. So create a temporary variable to hold it. And using the heading value, we need to first convert it to a string. Once it's converted to a string, then we can convert it to lowercase. We can also do uppercase. So there are two options there. So we can easily convert it to a lowercase. And what we want to do is we actually want to return back that lowercase value for headings. So that means that if we return the heading item as a string value to lowercase, that headings list is going to rebuild the array with all lowercase for the headings. So see what that looks like. So there's our list of values there coming from the heading of the sheet, and it's returning back the lowercase. So next up, what we want to do is we want to separate out the content from all of the headings. So it's going to be the next option, and this is going to be where we've got the content, or we'll just call it data actually, as it's going to be the whole data block of content. So we take rows, and using slice, we slice starting at row number 1, and if we don't have an ending row, it's going to take out all of the data from the rows. And so if we do data and data here, and then update and refresh our developer option, we're no longer going to be showing all of the headings. That now we're starting the data at the row where we've actually got the content, and that's what we want. We want to skip the headings values there. So next up, for the output, what we want to do is we want to actually format the content. Now that we've got the headings out and we've converted them to lowercase, we can use those headings and we can add in the data itself as objects. So we're going to convert the arrays into an object. And so what we're going to do is we're going to get the data and then the headings list and convert all that information into an object, and then return that back and output that content. So let's construct that. And we can just call it data1, or we'll call it data object. So it's a little bit different there. And we're going to pass the data contents. So that was where we've got all of those arrays of data that we're currently outputting. And we're going to pass that in as data into the make object. And then we're also going to pass in the new headings list that we've just constructed. And lastly, we're going to output the data object so that we can see the contents of the data object. And then for the make object, we've got a listing of all of the posts, and we've got a listing of all of the headings. So let's construct a temporary object, and I'll just call it temp1, where we're going to have all of the, we're going to have the data, and then using the map method, it's going to return back each one of the rows of content into an array. And for now, we can just log out that array data as we map it. And then also we can return the contents of temp1 if we want as well. So right now, we'll just return back each one of the items, and then we're going to construct it as an array. So let's run the doGet, and we'll check out what we've got as the output in the log. So we've got all of the data, the rows of data that's being output, the headings. So let me comment out some of this log information, and we'll run that one more time. So we've got quite a bit of stuff going on in the log. So as it's looping through the data, we're getting each one of those arrays here, and that's within the make object. So here we can actually construct our object as we're mapping it. So let's set up a temp, or this can just be an object. And then within the object, as we're looping through, we want to loop through all of the headings. So take headings, and using for each, we can loop through each one of the headings. And this way we can construct the object out of the headings. So using the object and bracket notation, we can take the heading and we can assign a value to the contents of the array. So if we get the index value as we're looping through the headings, this is going to correspond with the index value within the array. And so actually what we're going to be returning back at the end here is going to be that object, and we don't need to log that out anymore. Now we're returning all of that data content from the spreadsheet as a usable object, and we can run the do get within the terminal, and we see this is what we've got back for the response. So we've got a response object with the title, the response, the category. So it's all formatted within an object format. And now we can take that object data and output that in place for the web application. And now let's go to deploy it. We're going to deploy it as a new deployment as object. And the rest of the parameters stay the same. We're executing as the same default Google account and allowing anyone to access it. So we're hitting the deploy there for it and done. And then now let's go back to our web application. We're going to refresh the web application data. And in the console, so we initially get everything back as a data object. So it's being returned back. Let's take a second look at what we're outputting as the content and make sure that our web endpoint is being output as the object, which it's not. So we need to redeploy it. So it looks like it is outputting it properly to the default web application. So let's try that one more time to do the deployment and hit the deploy and open up the web URL. And we'll just make sure that it's being returned back within an object format. So that's been updated. And then as we refresh it, now we're getting undefined back because now it's returning the data within an object format. So let's update our front end code. So it's not returning back undefined, and we're going to use the actual object structure to output the content. So each one of these elements is being returned back as an object. So if we want the ID, we would do LID. If we want the content, then we would do L content. And if we want the response, then we just do the L response in order to get the object content back, save it, and now we're outputting the content just as before, but the data is structured within an object format. So it's a little bit easier to read, more human readable than before. So let's also now update our endpoint to take a category. So if no category is provided, then it's just going to return back all of the jokes. But if there is a category provided within the request, within the parameters, then we're going to return back only the jokes from that particular category. So just as we're creating the main object that we want to use within the object data. Next, we want to filter it and return back only for the categories. So we can get the category within the do get, within the parameters, and check to see if the category exists within the parameters. So returning back and selecting, getting the parameters, and we're going to pass in a URL of cat within the parameters. So let's select that object, and we're going to create the cat category, and then we're going to use a function in order to manage the category creation. So the category finder, and within the category finder, we're passing forward the parameter object, and we can just pass it as an argument called e in order to pick that up. And so what we want to do is we want to loop through the parameters and output that content. So for the parameters in apps script, we can look for either the parameters or by the parameter key and return back the first available found result. So we'll take a look for within the parameters a category, and if category is in parameters object, and that's being passed in, and that's automatically generated with the do get. And you can find out more about do get and do post and getting the request parameters within the request parameter query strings over at the developers.google.com/appscript/guides/webs. And then just on the left-hand side, under the type of scripts, web apps, it's going to give you a full listing of what you can expect from the request parameters. So this is available within doGet and doPost. So these request parameters are passed in automatically and constructed from the query string. So if you want the full query string, you can get it that way with the eQuery string. And if you want the eParameter, you can look for the object with the parameter value. And in this case, we're going to look through the eParameters, where we're going to look for any ones that have the category as the property name. And you can see that over here it's got name Alice. So we're looking for, instead of name, we're looking for cat. And then whatever the first item is within the array is what we want to return back and work with. And that's important to remember as well, that the eParameters is an array because there is a possibility of more than one item being returned back. So we look within the eParameters for an object named cat. And if it is, then we are going to take that category and return that back to the user. So we're returning back. So do a return from the eParameters, whatever we've got for cat. And we want to get the first item within the array, so possibility of more than one. So we only want the first one being returned back. And otherwise, we'll return back null as the value. So if cat is null, then we're not going to look for categories. But if it's not null, then within the data object, we want to only return back the ones that match within the categories. Now we do have an option here where we could, by default, when we're making the object, we can check to see if the value of E is going to be matching the category selected while we're making the object. And one of the problems with doing it that way is that if this ever gets moved around, then if anything changes within the spreadsheet and the category object order changes, then we're no longer going to be able to select it by the category. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to loop through all of the data object another time and check to see if they match within the categories. So we're doing a check to see if cat exists, and if it does, then we're going to loop through the data object using for each, and that's going to capture each one of the elements items there. And as we loop through, we're going to check to see if the category object is actually going to be included within the list there. So we're checking to see if L, and that's going to be the element category, is equal to cat. So we'll have the condition there. And if it is, then we want to match that and update the data object. So another way that we can do that is by using the filter within the array. So what filter does is allows us to create a new array by passing in some data and see if it matches the test value. So this was one way that we can do it, and another way that we can do it. So I'm going to just comment out this block of code. And the second way that we can accomplish this is that we use the filter. So use the data object, and I'm going to change the data object to a let so that we can actually update the data object as we do the filtering. So we're going to use the data object and the array filter method to filter through and get the item, and only return back items that are going to match where the item category is equal to whatever the value of cat is. So that's what we're going to be returning back within the filter. So it's going to reconstruct the data object. And if there are no E parameters, then what I'm actually going to do is I simulate the value of cat coming back as one of the categories, and to see if we can only return back that particular item that matches that particular category. So save that, and then we're going to run the doGet. And so now we do only get back the one joke that did match the category because we're able to filter it. So we can also duplicate some of these. I know it's the same joke, but we'll give different IDs for them. So that will give us a more sampling of more content. And now let's clear it and we'll run do get again. And now we can return back content via the category. So now that that's working, let's comment that out and re-enable the cat. And now within the request URL, we can now use the cat in order to return back only matching results for that particular category. So try out the test deployment. We'll copy the web URL and then !cat. So we only want to return back the matching categories for vampire. So that gives us the ability to filter for a particular category. So let's now deploy this. Category working. And deploy the new version of the web application. And add that in so we can set any one of these as the category. So let's try sports. And then we'll add to the URL the value of the category. So now within the web application, we need to have cat equals. And this actually needs to be a question mark. So it looks like that's working, and it usually does take a few minutes for that web API to update. So you might have to refresh it a few times in order for the update and for the changes to take place. And you could also verify that you've got the new URL is constructed this way, and we can use whatever the new URL is within the fetch request, and also output the new URL into the console. And let's set the new URL there before the load data. So that's the URL that it's connecting to. I'm just going to double check and make sure that I have the right URL. So let me update that, save that, and we'll go back out and try out the web application again. So it looks like it is working now and returning back only the relevant items to that category.